Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
Well, what I've told you is there are states that didn't follow their laws. That is what the state constitution, the U.S. Constitution requires. I've seen in my own state where we had to send our elections commissioner to jail years ago for fraud and corruption, and we cleaned up our act in our state. Every state ought to follow the laws that are on their books. That's what the U.S. Constitution says.
That's not what I asked. I said, can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
Look, Joe Biden's president. I know you and others want to talk about 2020. We're focused on the future. We've talked about 2020 a lot. We're talking about how to get our country back on track, how to get our economy moving, how to stand up to the bad actors around the world. Xi is not slowing down in China. He's looking at Taiwan. You see what's going on in Russia. You see what Iran is doing to work with Hamas and other terrorist organizations. This administration needs to pick up the pace. They're not standing up to the bad actors around the world. They need to. We're passing bills to address this through the House. The Senate needs to take action. The president needs to take action as well. That's what we're focused on in the House.
I know that Joe Biden is president. I'm asking you a different question. Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
What I've told you, and you've seen this, there are states that didn't follow the laws that are on their books, which is what the U.S. Constitution says they have to do.
So you just refuse to say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
So you want to keep rehashing 2020? We're talking.
I just want an answer to the question, yes or no.
Threats to this country. We've talked about this before, but again, will you acknowledge that there were states that didn't follow the actual state legislative enacted laws on their books, which the U.S. Constitution says they're supposed to do?
I know that every court that looked at whether the election was stolen said it wasn't, rejected those claims. And I asked you a very, very simple question. Now I've asked it, I think, the fifth time that you can't appear to answer. Can you say unequivocally that the 2020 election was not stolen?
I told you there were a handful of states that didn't follow their laws. The rest did.
Let's be perfectly clear here. Steve Scalise very clearly knows that the election wasn't stolen, but he can also see the writing on the wall and knows that if he wants a future in the Republican Party, then he's not allowed to concede objective reality. Why? Because the whole point of the Republican Party is that they're playing pretend about what happened in 2020 because they don't want to invite the ire of Donald Trump. And so now we've got these grown-ass adults lying to themselves and their supporters because it's not about helping their constituents, it's not about lowering healthcare costs or raising wages or protecting consumers. The only thing they care about is kissing the ring for Donald Trump, a political party that exists solely to serve one person. But the interview actually got worse for Scalise.
They say it's our debt. We addressed both in this bill, and we got a bipartisan vote, George, and I think that's important too.
But let me just stop you. Let me just stop you right there. You say you addressed the debt. In fact, and you're the one who referenced the CBO. The CBO said that this proposal you put on the floor that you passed the House is actually going to increase the deficit, not reduce the debt.
Well, only CBO would say reducing the size of government.
Well, you just cited the CBO. That's their analysis. It's going to reduce it because you're taking away enforcement.
But the CBO said it's going to actually hit people making under $400,000 a year with $4 billion in new taxes. That violates President Biden's own pledge, by the way, that he made to low-income families. He promised he wouldn't raise their taxes. CBO said it would be a $4 billion hit to those families. At the end of the day, we passed the bill to give the aid to Israel, and it was a bipartisan vote, and it's over in the Senate. If the Senate has an issue with the bill, they can take it up. If they send it to the president, I have no doubt the president would sign that bill because that gives Israel the aid that they need, again, with a bipartisan vote out of the House.
Congressman, I'm confused. You cite the CBO approvingly when they agree with the proposal, when they agree with your conclusions, and you dismiss them when they disagree?
The CBO's been wrong on a number of fronts, and you can go look at how well that's documented. The bottom line is they do acknowledge that about $4 billion in new taxes would hit low and middle income families. That's something that violates President Biden's own promise he made during the campaign.
They also say quite explicitly it's going to increase the deficit, but we'll move on right now.
Only the CBO would say that reducing the size of government would increase the debt. That's what Scalise just said, which is a perfect testament to just how much disdain he has for his own supporters, because that is as inaccurate as it is lazy. Cutting costs doesn't just blindly reduce the deficit. When you cut things that bring in revenue, then revenue goes down. In this case, funding the IRS, yes, does bring in more revenue. So when Republicans are seeking to cut $14 billion from the IRS, that means we'll add $27 billion to the deficit. So when Scalise says only the CBO could say that reducing the size of government could increase the debt, Yeah, dude, that's literally how math works. When you cut funding to the entity that brings in revenue, then you increase the deficit. And if he didn't treat his supporters like idiots, maybe he would be able to acknowledge as much. And by the way, these lies come from the top. Here's Mike Johnson, the new Republican speaker, making the same claim only days ago.
Be careful, everybody be careful.
Were you surprised by the CBO score, sir?
Not surprised at all. Only in Washington, when you cut spending, do they call it an increase in the deficit.
In other words, these lies aren't a bug, they're a feature. They are the whole strategy from the top down for the Republican Party. But you know what they say? The fish rots from the head. And let's be clear, they're not fooling anyone. Here's Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern calling this out to their faces on the House floor.
This is a complete waste of time. It is ridiculous. And I haven't even got to how cynical and insulting this new supplemental aid package is. Republicans are leveraging the excruciating pain of an international crisis to help rich people who cheat on their taxes and big corporations who regularly dodge their taxes. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, the fact of the matter is the richest people in this country pay less in taxes than teachers, than police officers, than firefighters, than nurses, than laborers. I mean, this is what this is all about? Who came up with this brilliant idea to help rich tax cheats? Who came up with that idea? Was that hatched at a fundraiser in Mar-a-Lago? Did some big donor come up and twist somebody's arm and say, you got to do this, you got to protect this, we want to continue to cheat on our taxes so we can make more, keep more money? I mean, this is truly despicable. And here's what I love. The bill's so-called offset cuts $14.3 billion from the IRS, which will further increase the deficit. Basically, they want to cut funding from those who are responsible for holding big corporations accountable, for going after rich tax cheats. That's their offset. And according to CBO, it will add to the deficit. Let me repeat that. This bill adds $12.5 billion to the deficit. Their offset actually needs an offset. Once again, I mean, they cry and they cry and they cry about the deficit, but have no problem conditioning aid to Israel on another tax break to millionaires, billionaires, and corporations. I mean, Representative Chip Roy, who's on the Rules Committee, said, or maybe yelled, and I quote, "This aid should be paid for. It should be paid for with real money, not budgetary gimmicks."
So they can lie until they're blue in the faces, but the truth is that they're not fooling anyone. Worse, they are proving to their own base that they will never not lie, even when they're called out on those lies to their very faces. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on the screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.